Hello, this is the sermon for the 11th Sunday of Pentecost, and the reading that is being preached on is from the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 12, verses 18 to 29. Today's passage from the letter to the Hebrews offers, by turns, words of warning and encouragement. It begins by reassuring its hearers that they are not destined for Mount Sinai, described in the passage as a place of fear, but that they are destined for Mount Sion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, described as a place of joy. And we may question the fairness of the author's depiction of Sinai, but even if the author is exaggerating, if we turn to the book of Exodus, what we find is that the encounter of the Israelites with God at Sinai is indeed described as being accompanied by blazing fire, by darkness, by the sound of a trumpet, and by the warning that not even animals are to touch the holy mountain on pain of death. The author of Hebrews nevertheless immediately continues by warning their hearers not to refuse the one, that is, God, who is speaking. For if they did not escape when they refused the one who warned them on earth, how much less will we escape if we reject the one who warns from heaven? Next, quoting the prophet Haggai, the author of Hebrews says that God has promised that yet once more I will shake not only the earth but also the heaven, and interprets this shaking to mean the dissolution of the created order, saying, this phrase, yet once more, indicates the removal of what is shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. The shaking is nevertheless a good thing, however, because as a result of it, we receive a kingdom that cannot be shaken, that is, God's eternal kingdom. Our proper response to this is to give thanks, by which we offer to God an acceptable worship with reverence and awe. The question we face is what to make of this combination of comfort and warning. For one thing, we may at best not be sure what to make of the contrast in the letter to the Hebrews between that which is earthly and that which is heavenly, of that which is of the created order and of that which is of the eternal realm. In our passage, expressed by the contrast between Sinai and Sion, and by the promise that created things will be removed to make way for the unshakable. At worst, we may suspect the author of the letter to the Hebrews of sharing the perspective of the contemporary philosophical movement of Neoplatonism, which taught that, even though the material world is made in the image of unseen realities, it is nevertheless inherently inferior to those realities, a mere shadow or copy of what is truly real, which are the insensible forms. Now, although Christian thought has been enriched by its engagement with philosophy from its beginnings down to the present day, one downside of borrowing specifically from the idealist schools of thought, such as Platonism, has been the devaluing of the sensible material world by Christians through the ages. Such a view has been immensely popular, as it is behind the commonly held notion that our souls are supposed to escape this world in order to go to heaven. And this is a problem because it tends to lead to the rejection of the human body and its needs as wicked, and in our day, to a willingness by some Christians to ignore or deny the climate crisis. After all, if our earthly existence doesn't matter, it also doesn't matter that we are gradually destroying the Earth's capacity to sustain life, because God is going to rescue the elect anyway. However, as we shall see when we hear next week's passage from the letter to the Hebrews, the author's emphasis on heavenly things is precisely in order to help guide our earthly affairs. So even though it is true that the author of Hebrews sets the heavenly above the earthly, in the letter to the Hebrews, the earthly has intrinsic value by virtue of being a copy of the heavenly. This is suggested in today's passage from the letter to the Hebrews, in that our earthly thanksgiving and worship is modeled on the joyful divine worship in the heavenly Jerusalem, described as a place in which there are innumerable angels in festal gathering, as well as the assembly of the firstborn who are enrolled in heaven, and God the judge of all, and so on. Indeed, we would not be out of line if we were to interpret what the letter to the Hebrews says in today's passage as meaning that our earthly worship, if done with reverence and awe, gives us access to the unseen divine reality that undergirds the material world. In the Eucharist, we are united with God's very self by receiving the bread and wine as the body and blood of Christ. By God's grace, then, the material reality of our everyday world truthfully and adequately symbolizes and represents the spiritual reality of God's realm in the sacraments. And the created order is inherently good because it derives from and participates in uncreated eternality. Now, all that probably sounds highfalutin, but what it boils down to is that the material world matters to God. How we treat our own bodies and the bodies of others matters to God. How we treat the natural environment matters to God. Matter matters. We are not souls trapped in bodies, hoping to escape this wicked world to heaven, but embodied beings who have been created precisely in order to care for the created order, which God in the first creation story in Genesis saw was very good. This does mean that we have work to do. We have to take responsibility as individuals, as a community, as a nation, and as global citizens for the current environmental crisis. This will require the discipline to change our ways, if necessary, so that collectively we care for rather than neglect the environment. It will require adopting long-term solutions, even if they result in short-term pain. However, that matter matters does not mean only that we face hard work. It also means that we are permitted to care for and nurture our bodies, to love ourselves. We are permitted to enjoy this life to the fullest, so long as our enjoyment is in keeping with the great commandment to love our neighbor as ourselves. We are allowed to have fun and to rest. God has made us for joy, for laughter, and for delight. For as it says in the 16th Psalm, in God's presence there is fullness of joy, and in God's right hand are pleasures forevermore.